I'll stand up here. One of the beautiful things about watching children grow up is seeing how much they learn, change, and grow on what seems like a daily basis. You don't like how your kid is sleeping? Wait 6 months. You want to see just the miracle of life just every couple of weeks. I remember when my eldest, after his first week of school, I could hear a difference in his voice. And at some point, I'm not going to say this is going to happen to her, but for the vast majority of us, when we grow up, we think we have a handle on this life. And we stop seeing that in our own selves. We stop acknowledging that we need to change, grow, and adapt to the world around us. We end up thinking that we're stuck in the mud, that our personality is set, and tomorrow is going to look a lot like today. That's what the core of Genesis 29 tries to address. For the last 4 weeks, we've been walking with the character of Jacob. And if you've been walking with us for the last 4 weeks, you have gotten to know someone you don't really like. Jacob is not a nice person. He swindles his older brother out of his firstborn birthright. He deceives his father. And he has this very tenable conversation with God where he's trying to bargain with God what the promise that God is making to him is going to look like for his life. And then this story happens. This story of when Rachel meets the love of his life. When Jacob meets the love of his life named Rachel. Jacob is coming near the place of Haran, where distant family members are. And he sees her in the distance. The Bible describes Rachel and her beauty. You always got to pay attention. Like if you had anything described about you in the Bible, I don't want to read what the Bible's going to say about me. But it's definitely not mentioning my looks. But the Bible describes Rachel as being exceedingly beautiful. And her job as a shepherd. Now, the Bible doesn't do a lot of big favors for women, especially what's going to happen in this passage. But it's well worth noting that Rachel's profession is that of a shepherd. Who do you know who's a shepherd in the Bible? I'm not hearing anybody. Come on. David, king. Who else? Moses. The lawgiver. Who else is a shepherd in the Bible? We kind of talk about him once in a while around here. Jesus, the great shepherd of our souls. And Rachel. What kind of company is Rachel in terms of the biblical metaphor? She's held very high. So she comes strolling up to the well. Jacob can't control himself. He sees that she's walking her flock up. He removes the stone that requires 3 people to lift because bro had some gains and was going to show off for the lady. As she gets there, he immediately kisses her. We need to teach him something about consent. And then he begins to weep. One thing, once you get past the whole consent question, the reason he weeps is over the love that he is experiencing for Rachel. I don't know what kind of manliness or rubric of what it meant to be a man you grew up in, fellow dudes, but that a man who cries over the love that he has in his heart is biblical manhood. Man who cries over the love in his heart is biblical manhood. Now he's welcomed into the home of Rachel's father, Laban. Now, depending on how you want to read this story, Laban can come across as a very shrewd trickster, cut from the same cloth as Jacob. But But that's not his very first words. The first words out of Jacob's mouth to Laban is, I will work 7 years if you will let me marry Rachel. I'll work for you. It's over the top, above and beyond what would be kind of expected as working for it. And he's just offering it up. He's not trying to cut a deal. He's not trying to swindle. Remember the last few weeks of this guy. He would try to swindle anybody out of anything. Hey, how about this soup for your firstborn heritage? Hey, Dad, whose vision isn't great, feel my arm. Listen to my voice as I do my best Esau impression. This time, no swindle, just above and beyond generosity because he wants to marry Rachel. What a change. What growth. This is the first step in this man's transformation as a person that we're going to get next week. That's where it comes into full, his transformation finds its completion in next week's biblical story. I can't wait. I can't wait to hear it. So he does it, and he performs the 7 years of work. And the Bible gives, there's genre all over the Bible. The line in the Bible, the years passed like days because of Jacob's love for Rachel. You ever thought that this would be a romance? This is the first instance of real romance in Scripture. Like pure passion from the heart. The wedding day shows up. It's the feast. And Laban pulls a trick. We aren't given a lot of details over how this trick got pulled off. But Jacob goes through the whole wedding feast, not realizing that the veiled woman sitting next to him is not in fact Rachel, but her older sister Leah. He goes through the whole wedding ceremony and the first night of marriage. We'll just leave it at that. Wakes up the next day and is losing his mind. He can't believe it. He is thrown for a loop. Where is Rachel and why can't I marry her? Why did I marry this one? And it's actually to this tune that still in Jewish synagogues when they perform a wedding, and what a lot of traditional marriages used to do, you'd be veiled in the front. You have the train in the back now at a wedding. This would be a veil in the front, and the groom lift up the veil before the marriage vows as a reminder that Dad's not throwing a fast one. Leah, as much as Leah's just a tragic character in this story, because as much as Rachel is talked about in these high beauty job, like the same job as Moses and David, Leah is described as not as beautiful and weak in the eyes, which is a turn of phrase that seems to have been lost in the ages, but is generally understood to be common. Every day. In response to waking up to Leah and bringing it to Laban, Laban says, finish out this wedding week, because weddings were a week-long affair. And anybody who's had to pay for a wedding in any recent time is going, a week? I could barely pay for a night. After that, I'll let you marry Rachel, and then you get to work for me another 7 years. Few thoughts on this passage. One, if you saw our sanctified art this week, and the kids are working on it in the back, where's the artist in our sanctified art for display displayed the three women. Laban offered up another handmaid to Leah on the wedding day. These women have no voice, no agency, no choice. The absence of their perspective is huge. It would be pretty easy to write it off as, well, this is a patriarchal text from a pretty sexist narrator who's just focusing on this. But with such wide gaps in the story, it leaves for legends. Stories that midrash that fill the Talmud and other the rabbinical literature for centuries. And let me tell you, when I was preparing for this sermon, you can get lost in what some of these perspectives can have. The fact that we don't know what Leah thinks about any of this, the fact that we don't know what Rachel thinks about any of this. Like, this is, HBO should really get the rights to this story, because it could be fun. You can get the love triangle. Like, Jacob loves Rachel, but Rachel doesn't love Jacob, but Leah loves Jacob. That would be the classic. You can get that Laban is this evil, maniacal guy just trying to pawn off his women to the richest person he can find. And if I can get them all into one family, then it'll be great. One that I actually like, one interpretation that I've kind of found speaks to me is that if Rachel got married before Leah, and Leah is already known as, she's already described in these like lesser terms than Rachel. And then, as Laban says, it's their custom not to marry off the eldest daughter before the second. Leah would have been dishonored by this wedding. She'd be cast aside. She'd be forgotten about. She'd likely never have the security that comes with being married. So Rachel, because Rachel doesn't say anything, one word from Rachel to Jacob about her dad's plans, and it's all over. She buys into this plan so that out of love for her sister. It's possible. I wanted to leave some of that open because I get heartbroken when somebody who's clearly a commodity, these women were literally Jacob's wages. I want to give them some kind of voice. But the narrator telling this story is focused on Jacob and Jacob's transformation. That's what this story propels. What changed Jacob from being just a trickster like he's been his whole life into a hard-working, honest person who's just trying to get where he wants to be in this world? The love of his heart. What made him go through the trauma, recognizing that he is being tricked like he tricked his own dad and his own brother? What pulls him through that? Notice, when I told you this story, did I ever say God said anything? Did you hear God and then God intervened? No. This personal transformation that Jacob goes through is something he goes through. And that is the lesson for all of us. When we want to see change in our lives, when we've encountered, when we reckon something in ourselves or in our world, we don't just try to numb it, shove it away, and act like it doesn't exist. We don't pine for the days before our trauma. We go through them. Everly, learning to walk, speak, and eat doesn't go about it any other way than going through it. You don't graduate from high school and become an adult. Hopefully that's when you become an adult, but without going through that experience. You didn't get through the awkward phase of junior high without going through that experience. You didn't get through the hard points of your relationship with your significant other without going through them. So easy it is to deny, numb, and put aside what we're trying to feel. It's easy to point towards, substance use. As I can't deal with the grief of the loss of my friend or my family member, so I'm drinking. But easy enough, people put work into that. I can't, if I can stay ahead of the pain by keeping my schedule so full, I don't have to reflect on the hard things of my life. Some people use religion. And the number of people I have to pastor through who they went through something awful, and some, hopefully well-meaning, Christian tried to slap a Bible verse on it. Don't worry, be happy. You don't have to be scared. It's going to be okay. God has this. You're not going through the experience. You're putting it aside, separating it. You're not learning to walk. You're just being happy crawling on the ground. And some people will hail back and look to the previous time as before this all happened. If we could just go back, there is no going back. There's only going through. And that's for our personal sense. And you can take that experience of personal transformation and what it takes for you to grow, really grow, and paint that into what we have to experience as adults in larger society. I was on a continuing education event where we were learning about sacred spaces for First Nation peoples. We're at the Mendota Heights Bridge, or underneath the Mendota Heights Bridge. And you know what, in that park down there, that's literally where the Dakota people believe their version of the Genesis story occurred. It's wild to sit in a space where this is where they believe creation started, where that's where the story goes. We're being told this by this Jim Bear. He's this prolific speaker through the Council of Churches. And as he's speaking to us, another indigenous person, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, another indigenous person shows up and he's had too much to drink. And he's belligerent towards Jim, who is trying to educate us, inform us. When we get through the event, he ends up saying this, he didn't believe that I was doing what was right. Because they're dealing with the remnants of continued, prolonged oppression of First Nation peoples. That to some extent, the continued substance abuse has its origins into the relegation of people to not just this, we're standing in that Genesis area, feet away was one of our concentration camps, a place where we penned in First Nation peoples as we were becoming a state. Lay that out for so much of this community trauma that we've had to experience, whether that's with African Americans, members of the LGBTQIA+ community. You want to deny? We want to go back to the way things used to be? Or are we willing to feel what we feel and then go through the trauma? And as Christians, what we are told by the God who came and fleshed in Jesus is that when we go through the worst of our days, we will not be destroyed by them, but we are reborn in the resurrection. We fear not our death. We fear not being wrong. Come on. You want to hang out with me? Come hang out with me. That's right. On the other side of feeling your character being challenged, whether that's a positive thing like learning to walk, learning to talk, or going through the challenges of realizing you were wrong and having to ask for forgiveness, or seeing how the world wronged people from so long ago. There is a God that stands outside of time, hoping, praying, ushering, moving through spirit and other people to see you through to the other side. Notice this, both of these two women, without both of them, the 12 tribes of Israel are not born. Leah, who is described with all of those being less than, she ends up having Rachel only ends up having 2 children, Joseph and Benjamin. The others, they come from Leah, going through the trauma to the other side. Sisters and brothers, when we get on the other side of our trauma, our character development, our transformation, what will it hold for us?